I don't know if I should be making this video like without anything to like visual aid or whatever else, but I have to say it. Why don't you understand how electrons work? I'm talking to everyone who's a scientist. Talking to NASA, talking to Kyle Hill and Z Frank and Bill Nye and science girl, physics girl, Diana. Heck, I'll even ask Austin this. Why don't you know how electrons work? It became kind of obvious to me that electrons are, in fact, not just one thing. There's an interesting theory that went around where all the electrons are the same electron. And the problem is, you're half right. All the electrons that you see around an atom are the same electron. Every atom that, for example, every hydrogen atom that has just one electron and you see a bunch of electrons orbiting that, there's a reason why you see all of that. I'm about to explain it. Okay, so we all know the idea of a tape measure and how it basically has a lot of feet all rolled up into a single ball if you're a clothing person, or into a tape measure if you're a construction person. So the thing about it is, imagine you had to look at an electron in a single second. You know that they go 2.2 kilometers per second. So you have a measuring tape that basically is as tiny as you want it to be for full size, but the length is that 2.2 kilometers. However, electrons don't go in straight lines as commonly as we see them orbiting atoms. So, how big of a difference is it compared to the size of 2.2 kilometers and the actual size of an atom? Well, an atom is about 0.1 nanometer or 1/10 of a nanometer thick. Okay, so if a tenth of a nanometer is the size of an atom, and you have an electron which is smaller than an atom orbiting the atom, then you know, and you know the electron's speed, pretend you take that entire 2 kilometers worth and you spool back that measuring tape around an atom. You end up with 2.2 quadrillion instances of electron around an atom. That's not even an exaggeration. It's 2.2 quadrillion. Because 2.2 kilometers is... What is it? 2.2 thousand kilometers? Hold on. How fast is an electron? Okay. Yeah, it's 2.2 thousand kilometers per second. Now, kilometers is thousands of meters per second. So, let me just show you. Right, 1% the speed of light. So, yeah, 2.2 thousand. So there's no, first of all, since kilometers is 1,000 meters, 2.2 thousand kilometers is actually 2.2 million meters per second. That's more perspective, more accurate in my book. But that's not really helpful. So then what about the nanometers? So then we ask, how many nanometers in a meter?
1 meter is equivalent to 1 times 10 to the 9 nanometers.
Okay, so 1 times 10 to the 9 nanometers, and then you go up from meters to millions of meters, and you end up with just another 6 zeros onto that. You end up with the quadrillion I talked about. Well, million, billion, trillion. And the fact that it's, so it could be trillions of instances, it could be quadrillions of instances of the same singular electron around an atom. Every atom. So, like, that's crazy. Yeah, because you're adding another 6 zeros to get the millions of meters per second. This is black truffle popcorn. It just tastes like pepper. I don't know what it is. Anyway, so now that we know, based on its speed, based on the area that an electron occupies, we can imagine. Now, why do I say quadrillions of electrons per second? Why do I say there are that many, or trillions of echoes? Well, it comes from the fact that the electron orbits the atom. So um, it's the number of atomic widths that they travel in a second. It's about 1 trillion. It's crazy. It's a giant amount. We're dealing with massive numbers. So this is why when you look at an atom, you end up looking for where the electron is. But the truth is, you should be looking for 10 to the minus 16th seconds to be able to see an individual electron, and you still won't. And the reason is because it really doesn't matter what instance in time you see the electron. Because if a quadrillion of them exist around an atom at any given time, it doesn't matter if it's in, that's how many of them are just occupying that space based on their speed. And that's why when you speed up an electron, they go from a lower orbital to a higher orbital. Like they go from the inside bullseye of a dartboard to the outside bullseye of a dartboard. The reason for that is the faster you go, clearly you're going more distance per second, and therefore that vast distance has to spool around the atom more times, making more instances of the electron. It literally expands the space that it occupies by going faster. So it can't exist in a lower shell. It has to expand bigger. There seems to be an upper bound to this. But generally, we know that the more energy we put into electrons, the more they can expand and do things. That's why we're able to pick up cars with them. With the electromagnetic crane. Crazy. So, the thing about it is, some people are saying that it's been said for so many hundred, like, ever since we've been thinking about electrons. Ever since the double slit experiment failed to express fully what an electron is, people have been hypothesizing that the electron is behaving in a wave-like pattern. Okay. But the electron, no. Some people have been bold enough to say that the electron doesn't orbit. It does. We know simply by the speed of the electron that its motion is governed by the attractive force of the proton in the atom that it's orbiting, and its own parameters that govern how fast it goes. So, okay, this makes sense about why you're able to see the electron being many over the space of the orbit of the atom. That's why it looks like a blur. You don't see just one. You know that there's only one there, but you see a cloud. They call it a cloud of probability. This is not true. This is not where you think it's going to be. It's there. Every echo of the electron that you're visually seeing is the electron. The difference is nanoseconds apart. So every second that you're looking at an electron, you're looking at quadrillions of echoes, slight past instances of the same electron. They physically exist there. The difference is, the main point to keep track of is, this one over here is a few seconds in the past. This one over here, or nanoseconds, femtoseconds in the past. This one is one step ahead of that. This one is a step ahead of that. The other one is a step ahead of that. They all orbit around the atom at such a high velocity that they occupy the space and bump into each other. And the electromagnetic field is so powerfully governed, and they all orbit in that same direction. It's possible they could orbit in different directions at some point, and that's the key. That if you think of an orbit, that sometimes what if it's going this way, and what if it goes this way, sideways compared to the normal north and south directions? Or what if it goes this way? It's like it can go round, it can go round, it can go all the different directions in three-dimensional ball type of orientation. It can go in any of those. So what happens is, every so often you see these weird patterns, and you're like wondering what the heck those are. Those are created by the electromagnetic field and the electrons moving in a pattern where they end up orbiting around, let's say, in an X configuration where they go around the electron the electrons go around the atom in an angle, and then when they go around the other side, they go around this side, making an X shape. That's just how their path is developed. It's based on the angle of attack around the atom compared to the center of the atom. If you were to go like straight up and down, so that the top and the bottom of your orbit are relatively in the same like hemisphere or time zone of the atom. Instead, what you see in these weird patterns is that the electron is moving at a different angle. So it makes all these different patterns. And that totally makes sense if you think of orbits with a slight askew angle instead of just a perfect circle. It has to be slightly off. That's just what happens. Like, you can make any of those patterns simply by tracing how an electron would orbit, or anything would orbit, and then track their movement over time and have every movement that they've made through that time be visible at the same time. That's what you're seeing. Because the difference between one motion of an electron and another motion with your visibility is about as fast as their interactions with photons, which are only 150 times faster than they are. So, yeah, you're not going to get a full picture there because 150 times sped up footage of electron doesn't really do it doesn't it's not a fast enough resolution. Somehow you got to go faster. The multispectrum um, system that people are working on, where the spectrum of light is shifting, changing from one spectrum to another constantly to make the most minute changes in their frequency, we can go down to femtoseconds. That kind of stuff can visualize an electron really good. I mean, really good. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know why anyone would think that they're just jumping around in some random pattern. That wouldn't explain the obvious weird orbits that we're experiencing. And the thing is, if it's going so fast that nanoseconds are like a single orbit for this, then yeah, we can only experience it in like massive chunks of information of its entire journey all sent to us at once. To any scientist, I hope that makes sense to you. I hope it actually like gets in your head and you stop pulling people away from thinking that electrons orbit because they do. That's just how they work. There's no reason to think otherwise. It's extraordinary evidence to say otherwise. In fact, it's more extraordinary to say they don't orbit because that kind of behavior is exactly what makes the most sense. I'd love to be proven wrong, but I'm not. That's the thing. I've seen people have other videos talk about the orbits of electrons being like a random distribution pattern. It's not random. You know that you can actually simulate an electron nowadays? If you slow down the simulation so slow that it takes weeks to compile it, take that footage and make it seem regular. And I don't care what computer you're using, it's going to take weeks to compile this. Because it's trillions of items per second. Isn't it hard to do that? But here's the thing. It's a trillion body problem. Because they're not just doing a single orbit. It's not just a standard orbit. You can't think that way. It's flows. The energy going through the electron passes from the front to the back, cycles around, and passes through again, like any magnet. So what you're going to notice, the other electron echoes that are nearby are sharing similar paths. They can only share these paths because the energy is going in that direction as well. And the electrons just kind of flow with that. They do their own thing and they do influence everything, but they mostly also still flow with their own energy. That's why it's like, what are the odds of an electron bumping into itself? It happens all the time. The spontaneous decay of an electron from a higher orbit to a lower orbit is simply because its angle of attack every so often around the atom changes as it does its motion around the atom. So if the governing electromagnetic field thing is photons, then the extra photon that's speeding it up every so often will have experienced an electromagnetic unstable position where it no longer has the ability to keep inside and keep with the electron, and it just shoots it out because it's incompatible. It just won't work. Because photons are so much faster than atoms, they lend their speed some to the electrons. Again, photons being 150 times faster than electrons. They say it's 1% the speed of light. Sure. The point is, when you go from 1 million or 2 when you go from 2 million to almost 300 million, the ratio is 150 times speed, not 100 times. Because if it was just 100 times speed, then the speed of light would just be 200 million meters per second. And it's not. It's 290. Something, something, something. That's why you need that extra 50. The rest of the way to get there. This is birthday cake popcorn. So, the thing is that the speed of an electron and the speed of a photon, when they're working together, their symmetry only allows, depending on the different, like, phase of the orbit of the electron, there are only certain configurations in the pattern of the electron's motion that are compatible with photons. Like, pretend that you have pretend that the photon is like a person on a skateboard going along with a car around a roundabout. if the car makes a sudden left turn instead of what it was normally doing, the guy on the skateboard goes in the opposite direction and is flung off. This is what happens to the photon. Now wait, hold on. But the photon is faster than the electron. That doesn't matter. It actually doesn't matter. The point is, the electron went suddenly in another direction, which it normally doesn't do, which is why it stays at a high orbit for a while, right? And then it decays back into a lower orbit eventually. Because eventually the electron's motion was too abrupt for the photon to keep up with it in the natural laws that govern how a photon will go along with the electron. It's like too tight of a bend. The photon is just flung out. That's how it works. So, yeah, it's like radiological decay. Now, what's happening inside of an atom, however, and radiation is kind of like more parts are being shoved into the atom itself than what it should be. And so every so often, the components that control the binding agent, which is the strong force, are doing their thing. And at some point, if you think of the radiation out of a radioactive isotope, right? Like eventually, whatever is going on inside that atom, it just dislodges. Now the biggest question is why? That's the true probability, supposedly. But again, it's governed by the same Newtonian physics. This popcorn is weird. Listen, the reason why Newtonian physics makes so much sense, and why I fall back to that, and why I believe it's how the electrons orbit an atom, besides the fact that it follows and makes sense a lot of things, there are ways of disproving why. There are ways to prove that it is not the case that they are just randomly moving around, jittering in an unorganized pattern around an atom. Why they just seem to be random fluctuations that jolt in one direction and then jolt in another direction. It's the same kind of logic that says that Mercury is in retrograde. It's not. Compared to the way that Mercury goes in retrograde is just a perspective thing. Is that as Mercury orbits the Sun, if we're on the same side of the Sun as Mercury, it's going the same direction as us. In its orbit, when it's on the other side of the Sun, it's going the opposite direction as us. Similarly, energy conservation basically says it wouldn't make sense for an electron to just randomly move around, because you have to think of, well, what's organizing that? What's making it so that that happens? Not to mention, it sounds really unstable, and it sounds like something that should break apart all the time and doesn't. Electrons orbiting atoms is basically perpetual motion on the subatomic scale. It's the only reason why anything exists. Because otherwise we just get a lot of positive effects. And all of the protons and their positive effects with the neutrons and everything would just make a simple, like you just strip away all the electrons and then you have nothing but proton neutron soup. You don't have individual molecules or anything. The electrons are the backbone of everything. Their repulsiveness are the keys to making everything work. Making sure everything is, and depending on the inner structure of whatever atoms, you end up with structure of molecules and chains and all the different proteins and folding and everything else. Because physically they can only be connected in so many different ways. Depending on what atom, depending on how many parts are inside of that. And the electrons that hold them away from each other. Anyway. So if you think of electrons not orbiting, you have to wonder about the interactions that they'll have with other chemicals and what they would do. It makes more sense that in a non-orbiting electron state, and it's just bouncing around, that it wouldn't just stick around an atom for no good reason. It makes a lot more sense that because we see these patterns, and again, they're indicative of an orbit, so it doesn't make sense why it would just be random. And again, it's not the probability that it will be in any of these positions at any given time. It's there. And it was there a femtosecond ago. And the other places you found it a different femtosecond ago. That's how electrons work. I need to make a proper, I really want to make proper animations or commission an animator. Like literally $500 to the first animator who can say they have the ability to make an animation of like the long tape measure pulled back into the atom. Because if you think of it as a single pattern, Allow it to be infinitely thin, such that there isn't like this weird wide whatever. It's more like a string, really. But every instance of that measurement is another electron echo. Anyway, the the reason why I think of electron echoes is because I originally thought of just roundabouts. And the problem is they're going so fast that they run into themselves. Like if you take quadrillions of, let's say, instead of nanometer tenths of nanometers, you say quadrillions of meters and they're orbiting a single meter, well, what happened to the rest of that speed? What happened to the rest of those instances where they're forward in time? Well, they're all going to be there at the same time. Is the epiphany that I came up to the conclusion of. It only makes sense that they are a single atom in its orbit, occupying literally trillions of spaces all instantaneous in that same second. Every second. That's just fascinating. It reminds me of Persistence of Vision Jujitsu, where these anime characters are able to move side to side so fast, the visual of them still looks like they existed in those different spaces, but the truth is they're going so fast, they exist in every space in between those spaces as well as those spaces. And usually, the writers have it so that they primarily exist in only one of those spaces the most of the time, where they actually stop. And you can tell where that is based on how deep the ground has been pushed on. Because as they stand, okay, they may not have written that, but you would be able to tell because as they stand on any given spot, and also they literally would be just whipping up dirt all the time and pounding it really hard in order to move that fast. Otherwise, they could, I mean, they could be doing long strides where it's like jump, 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 and what you're seeing is only the times where they land before they make the next jump. That's why you don't see any footprints. So they exist like if you were to slow down time, slow it down, slow it down, slow it down, slow it down. You would be able to see them going from one position, skipping through the air, and it taking a long time for them to get to the other position in this invisible light spectrum that you can't normally see them in. And then they show up there. And then they jump to the next spot, and then back, and back again. You would see that. But reality, with our frame rate of like 30 frames per second or whatever, we only see the individuals whenever they decide to stop moving. It's like that for the electron, but all the time, constantly. And instead of 3 copies of them, there are trillions of them. And again, it's not like a shadow of it. It's not like an impression of where the electron was. It is where the electron has been, right? Like right now, the image of me is very solid because I'm only existing here right now, not moving a lot. But then when I'm moving my hand really fast, you can tell that I stop existing. You see less of my hand between the frames and more of my hand on the top and the bottom. That's persistence of vision. But that is electrons that are moving extremely fast. 2,000 kilometers an hour fast. In the space of a very tiny hair of a pin. It's like, that's what they're doing. So, yeah, of course you're going to see tons of echoes of them. You won't just see them going up and down like that. You know? You don't see the in-between frames, but they all existed like this. But then the faster you go, the less of that you see. You only see the top and the bottom as much, right? It's all about persistence of vision. All of my motion existed at the same time so fast that it doesn't appear that my hand existed between them, but it did. You know it did, you could do it yourself. That's what's happening with electrons just all the time and trillions of times faster. If you found this to be interesting, I hope you did, and make some proper science videos, because holy crap, I'm tired of you guys getting it wrong. Thank you. Goodbye.